Hello and welcome to the Parent Survival Kit podcast from surviving to thriving in your household. My name is Gene Schwalen. Next to me, as always, my beautiful bride, Dr. Sonia Schwalen, pediatric psychologist expert and nationally certified school psychologist. And we have a very special guest on our show today, all the way in town from A-Town, Austin, Texas. We've got Dr. B.
Dr. Becerril Hernandez Atwell.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
You know, you've got to be really important when you have so many last names. I mean, that's really awesome.
I know, it's like too many.
But you like to really, you prefer like Dr. B,
Yeah, just
a.k.a.
Dr. B. Yeah.
Dr. B.
Yeah, just Dr. B.
Dr. Bad to the bone.
That's right.
There you go.
All right, so
So
today...
she's one of ours, right? Do we want to talk about that a little bit?
She is pioneering the Austin area for NextSTEPS Worldwide. And she's got a lot of specialty areas. Neuropsych is really kind of her passion and really, you know, what she's going to come and talk to us about today. So
Neuropsych's an abbreviation. Let's just make it real clear. You're a neuropsychologist, right?
Yes, that's
All right. You can tell us what that means.
Yes.
Cool.
So neuropsychology. So, you know, as a dad, the question I would have is, what does a neuropsychologist do? And how's it, you know, what can it do for us as parents? Because I know that sometimes we need different things, and then also for our kids, so we can really help parents find the resources they need.
So neuropsychology is a field that looks to study the relationship between the brain and behavior. And so there's multiple reasons why you would go see a neuropsychologist. You could go see a neuropsychologist for concerns with your kid about ADHD. It could be that you're concerned, you know, they hit their head, they were playing, you know, football, and they've been having some trouble concentrating, and you want to see if there's something wrong. But I specifically see a big age range. So I see kids, but I also see adults, all the way to like 90, 95 years old. I think that's the oldest I've seen recently. Yeah. That's kind of like what you do as a neuropsychologist.
So memory, dementia,
Right.
you know, different types of things that we can look at.
Brain injuries,
Brain
attention,
injuries.
Concentration. I heard a lot there.
Yeah, it's a
Is
lot.
memory a part of it too?
Yeah, memory is definitely something that we assess. But neuropsychologists use neuropsychological assessment. And so assessment is basically, if I can compare it with what physicians do to get to a diagnosis, you know, when you go see your doctor, your PCP, you go and you have a complaint and they, you know, do some blood work, they run some labs. They might do an MRI if there's concern that something's wrong with your head. And what we do is kind of like just different diagnostic process, but we kind of do that through our assessment. And so we use cognitive tests to find, you know, if there's anything wrong with the way that the kid's processing information. But that's kind of like what neuropsychologists do. They just basically use assessment as a way to diagnose.
Okay, so different types of assessment measures you guys will administer and whatnot. What I like to look at it as is kind of like a you said an MRI. I like to say like a CAT scan. You know, you sit underneath this big machine and, you know, it just finds out all the things that are going on in your brain, right?
Yeah, kind of like that. That's and we do that a lot at NextSTEPS. We do a lot of assessment. And so it's really just that. It's paper pencil test. A lot of it we can do virtually right now. And we administer those tests. It can take up to 4 hours sometimes. Sometimes it can be less than that. And we use that data that we get from that assessment to kind of correlate different parts of the brain and see how they're working and, you know, what those areas of the brain, you know, do and what behaviors we're looking for. So if we're looking for, you know, your kid is having a hard time concentrating, and so they have bad grades, or they're just moving around a lot in their classroom, they can't sit still, you know, things like that. Those are behaviors that have a correlation to certain parts of the brain. And so the test that we give, we can kind of find out what specific part of the brain might be showing some issues, some problems, right? And through our testing, that's what we do. And a way to explain it is that we give these tests to, and I think, Dr. Schwalen, you can explain this too, we give these tests to a lot of children, and we get norms. And so we compare kids to kids their same age, basically, same grade level, and we see if they're operating at that same level, and that's how we know that something might be wrong. It's like a red flag pops off when we see that they're not operating as the rest of the kids their same age.
Okay.
And then, based on what the assessment data shows you, you can then make those conclusions or those inferences or correlations, like you said, about, okay, if it's this part of their brain that's being impacted, here's now what the recommendations are, right? And so you can very specifically make some good recommendations for parents based on that information.
Yeah, I think our tests, we've gotten, over the years, decades now, we've gotten so much better about understanding the brain and what it does. And so our tests can get a full picture of how the brain works, but it also, we can look at specific parts of the brain and how they are supposed to be operating it. And so our test, I like to explain it like, when you're coming to neuropsychological testing, is like you're probably telling your your family or people around you that there's something wrong, but you're not sure what it is. And so when you bring your kid with me and we do testing, I am taking that brain out for a ride, right? I'm putting that kid's brain to practice, and I want to see what's the parent seeing, right? When they're saying, well, he just cannot finish, a chapter in a book, and they have to come back to it and they have to read it over and over. So we create that same environment, but in testing. And so we're able to kind of capture it and see it in real life. It's a very cool thing that our test actually can do.
Yeah, that's very exciting. It's like, it reminds me of the term, let me pick your brain. So it must have came from a neuropsychologist, right? Let's pick your brain and
that's kind of what
see what's going on, right?
That's right.
So one thing that I have a little bit of information on is, like, for kids, as you mentioned, there's like ADHD testing. Every parent, I guess a good percentage of parents these days think all their kids have ADHD to some degree. And we'll dive into that more on the next episode that we're going to do part 2 to this. But, there's kids that play sports. So you mentioned, football with all the, head-on collisions, and but even soccer or football in Europe, there's just as many head injuries that you see in soccer. There's also, even in cheer, like, children just falling off the towers and, anything that can happen. So head injuries or anything like that, concussions, that may be something that we would want to go see a neuropsychologist for testing, right?
Yeah.
And then there's, when I think about parents, we have a lot of veterans that we help at NextSTEPS Worldwide. So some of those veterans who have experienced, like combat situations and whatnot, that may have experienced some head injuries or explosions close by, they may need some neuropsychology testing as well. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. It's very interesting that you bring up soccer and football and concussions in kids. It's actually, we do understand really well how concussions work. And there's so many studies on football players, and, I'm sure we could do an episode just on that. It's such an interesting topic. But when it comes to kids, we need to remember that their brain's still developing. And when they play their soccer or football, anything that makes their brains kind of like go back and forth, which we call that a coup contra coup. So whenever they're playing football, they're getting hit, right? And their brains just, it's like trying to find a way to explain that it's just like jelly.
Kind of like shaken baby syndrome, right, for infants?
That's right. It's jelly, and it's surrounded by actually really hard stuff. And so when you have really hard movements back and forth, it happens in soccer and it happens in football, and you stop that movement, right, which is when there's the tackle. I'm not a big sports person. Then that jelly just like really, it's like hitting a wall, right? And so it's the same thing for soccer and football. It's kind of like, really, it's more about how bad was the hit. Not that there's more risk in football or there's more risk in soccer. It's just it's just a brain that should not be doing that. And so when you do that repeatedly, that's when you see a problem in kids that play sports like that.
Let's talk about that, because I'm a huge football fan. I played football. I've coached my older son in football for many years. And he played all the way through middle school, and then he went on to some other sports in high school. But, there's so much research these days, and helmets today, I mean, they have these helmets designed in certain ways, and so much technology. But it sounds to me like at the end of the day, even with all the support in the helmet, their brain is still going to move inside their own head and inside their own structure. So they're still going to have that contact with the brain, that jelly you mentioned.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how great your helmet is, you're still going to have that impact on the brain regardless, right? With repeated over and over hits. Because in football, you're either hitting or you're getting hit, one or the other. Somebody's hitting, but it's going to affect everyone at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you're doing that repeatedly for days. And then, if you're a really good football player, which is great, but you're doing maybe all through high school. And our brains are not done developing as we, enter teenage years. We also know that our frontal lobe develops even all the way up to like our 30s now. So yeah, it's kind of a lot on growing brains. And the real, concern is for that movement, that repeated, head movement, or like that jelly.
The jostling jelly.
Yeah, hitting the wall.
That's my contribution.
Well, and I mean, you go out there and you make a great tackle, and even if you lead with your shoulder, which they're training a lot these days and whatnot, but you lead with your shoulder, make this amazing tackle. When you come off that field to the sidelines, your coach is smacking the heck out of your helmet, and that's a pretty significant hit too. I mean, people don't realize it, but man, I mean, you're getting hit in the head either by the player, or you're hitting them, or your coach is hitting you on the helmet, one or the other.
Yeah, I think we need to just be aware of like there's speed to that. And it's just physics. It's really what it is. And that speed doesn't stop, with anything other than that jelly, that beautiful jelly that we have up there. It stops with a really hard wall, right? And so, which is just our skull, our bones, that we do have bones. And so that is not helpful for our brain, our developing brain. It causes, over time, it causes changes. And then that can then lead to what we see as an actual cognitive complaint, right? Or attention problems. You can start to see those things in kids. It doesn't happen to all the kids. That doesn't mean don't go play football. Don't play sports. Just maybe, when you're a kid, you see your kid have a bad hit, maybe they should take a seat, maybe they should slow down. Yeah, it's just to be aware that is a concern, that is an issue.
Okay, excellent. So when we're talking about adults and whatnot, so speaking of some of the dementia, some of the memory loss things that you see, when should we, what are some of the signs that we should recognize when maybe, even us as parents may need to have a neuropsychology assessment, or even our parents? A lot of times these days, we've got multi-generational families, so we've got grandparents in the house, those who can't, live on their own anymore, and so that affects obviously the parents and the kids in a lot of ways. Can you speak to some of that?
Yeah. So, dementia is, and I want to define dementia. Dementia is an umbrella term, and as an umbrella term, there's multiple types of dementia, and I can say there's like probably 20 plus types of dementia. The most common ones are something like Alzheimer's. So I'll use Alzheimer's as an example. And so what we really do see in homes right now, because it's so expensive to take care of our loved ones who have dementia, is our kids have to take over the role of being a caregiver. Our, maybe older kids also need to do a little bit more. And so the entire system, the entire family has to do more together. And dementia comes with a lot of, problems. So like memory loss can be the first sign of something like Alzheimer's. And, someone with early onset Alzheimer's can be doing what we all do day to day, and they go unnoticed until they start getting lost. They forget how to cook their meals. And so you have a little kid watching that, or you have, someone young, they don't know why grandpa is doing that. And so, definitely dementia can affect the entire family in so many different ways.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
So I have a question, and I don't know what you're going to be asking next. Do you have something that you're going to be asking related to dementia?
No.
So I want to know if you can explain to the parents listening right now, like, what's the difference between a neuropsychologist and a neurologist, and how do you know which one you need?
So a neurologist is a doctor in medicine, right? And a neuropsychologist has a doctorate in psychology. And then we have specialized training in neuropsychology, usually 2 years. And then a neurologist, has a lot of training in neurology. They do residencies and fellowships and all that. And so the difference really is that we are the ones that do the assessment. A better way to explain it is when a neurologist has a concern that they kind of like pull us in. Usually we're a subspecialty within neurology. It's because they're not able to answer a question. That means the blood work was unremarkable, that nothing came back as, a possibility or like explaining why someone comes to their office. They did an MRI and it was generally unremarkable, or a CT. And so what they think is that it's the mind. It's the mind, it's the problem. So a difference would be a neurologist treats, the brain. And as a neuropsychologist, we're more aware of what the mind can do. And so what relations, how we, our knowledge of brain and behavior relationships. So that would be kind of like the difference.
So just to kind of make sure that, we're all understanding, the neurologist is more interested maybe in like the structure of the brain.
Right. So structure, nervous system.
Okay. So they're looking to see, our brain as an organ. Does the MRI show any kind of damage or any kind of warning signs structurally, like physically?
Inflammation,
right?
things like that,
Yeah,
right?
inflammation.
Okay.
If there's a tumor,
Okay.
is there a vascular problem because it's the brain is completely vascularized and
Okay.
so much blood flowing through it. And so
And then a neuropsychologist is really going to be more about the function of the brain.
That's right. The function of the brain. And how it's operating.
Okay. So it's not that there's like visible damage to the brain, but we know that certain parts may not be working the way we would expect.
Right.
Because there might be something more that the neurologist cannot find.
Right. And a lot of the times, the complaints that happen are things like, I've been forgetting things, and that's not a very easy thing to find in the brain. Where do you find the forgetting things problem, right? And so when they are including or they're considering a dementia diagnosis, actually part of the standing orders now is that they include a neuropsychological evaluation, and most of the times they do.
So, it kind of sounds to me like when you go to a neurologist, if there's any damage to the brain, something that's not working properly or whatnot, they're going to try to find a way to either fix it, heal it, or do whatever they can physically to the brain to really, take care of some damage that may have been done. Mm-hmm. With neuropsychologists, you're going to find the relationship between the actual brain and the functionality and behaviors. And with that, we can actually utilize that information to really even maybe have some different types of therapies that may be advantageous to really kind of help with those behaviors. Even if there is brain damage or something that's not functioning 100% properly, there may be things that can be done to help in certain areas.
Right. So we can offer compensatory strategies, and we do that through with therapy. That's what we do. We're a school, right, of thought, and we're a school. Whenever we recommend psychotherapy, we're recommending people to come to school. That's really what they do. Is they come and learn how to go around the problem that they're having, what else they can do to manage whatever, if it's an attention problem. And so that's basically the purpose of neuropsychological testing, and it's also about clarifying something that will sadly lead to something in the future. And so families need to prepare. They need to know Do I need to prepare for something that's coming? That in the case of dementia, for example, it's very, it's the new thing is that the earlier we can catch it, the better, because families will have to carry the cost of that disease. And so it's better when they know in advance so that they can prepare.
Well, and through therapy can provide support for the family, ways they can actually help support and do things like that. So
can we, since we're talking about therapy now and just some of the interventions that can come from a neuropsychological assessment, can you talk a little bit about what cognitive rehab is?
Yeah, so cognitive rehabilitation can do two things. We can work on strategies for remediation or compensatory strategies. Remediation and compensatory strategies are different. There are certain things that we really, once you hit your brain, and it's not always, you can't get back. There are certain functions that we lose depending on what it is that we're seeing. A stroke, for example. And so we might not be able to bring back the function. And so we'll teach compensatory strategies but remediation means that we can remediate, and sometimes we can't. And so cognitive rehabilitation really is the place where someone that has really suffered a big hit to their brain in some way, could be a stroke, could be a traumatic brain injury.
Or accident, anything.
An accident. That's where they would go to try and, find a solution. That would be cognitive rehabilitation.
Okay. So when you talk about just the way the brain works and whatnot, some things that I was inquiring about was, why would a child also go see a neuropsychologist? So things that I found through some research was seizures or epilepsy, muscle problems which may cause weakness, muscular dystrophy, things like that, or even like headaches, migraines, and then we talked about concussions already as well. So what is a neuropsychologist going to see with these types of maybe signs or concerns?
So when it comes to epilepsy, it can vary a lot, especially if it's in children. You can see changes in languages, and I'm sure you saw a lot of this because this is your area is pediatrics. But really you can see changes in behavior. You can see mood changes. It depends on where the activity, the seizure is happening in that part of the brain. And sometimes it could be, they can have hallucinations if it's on the temporal lobe, and those are seizures that are happening there. And so it really depends. It's actually, I wish I could say it, there's a one thing that you would see with kids who have, experiencing epilepsy. A lot of it really mainly is attention problems and concentration problems. That's what you would see the most.
Okay. And when it comes to epilepsy, we had a neighbor that I've known for, goodness, almost 18 years, and he was a younger kid in the neighborhood, and then he just passed just a couple of years ago, but he suffered severely from epilepsy, lots of seizures and whatnot. They can be that severe, I guess.
Yeah, it's actually once you have a kid that's been having those seizures for long periods of time, your brain doesn't develop like other kids. And if it's for a really long period of time, it's actually, it's really hard to remediate that brain, right? And we might be talking more about compensatory strategies. Those functions might not come back. But in a lot of cases with children, because they are still developing brains, it can be the opposite, and they can have great outcomes. So it really depends. It depends of how long they're having those seizures for, the chronicity, or like for how many years. It can even be at one point, neurologists will decide, well, this is when we would do surgery, right? And what they do is they sometimes remove parts of the brain, and in order to like make those seizures stop, they add things to your brain. It's like a little machine that you can have in your brain, and it kind of helps. It throws like a little current, and so it makes you stop having seizures. And that specifically, you can also get. So like there's a lot of treatment for it that neurologists can use. In really young children, though, that would not be indicated.
Well, I want to just reiterate, you know, what you said about with children, the outcomes can be very promising, because the human brain is malleable, you know, and like the simple way of saying that is it's very flexible. It's always capable of learning. It's always capable of evolving and growing. And it's even much more capable in a younger person because, you know, I think, you know, everyone's kind of heard that statement of you don't use it, you lose it kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Well, that's very true for kids because they actually come to the earth, you know, when they're first born with many, many, many more neural connections and neurons than they will ever even need. And so the brain is pruning and figuring out what do I need to hang on to based on the environment I'm in and what can I kind of throw out because I don't need it right now. And so because that's happening when kids are younger, those neural pathways essentially can reroute, and essentially the brain has its own compensatory system in place. So although a child's brain may be exposed to some kind of environmental trauma or something that happens even with epilepsy, the brain essentially can just reroute some neurons and like adjust, right, and make up for it. And that's why that's one of the reasons why in children it is so promising, and we have so much hope with kids because we just rely on the natural ability of their own brain to adapt.
Yeah, I mean the brain is obviously just it's an amazing organ, right? And you know, it just what it says to me is that anytime we have any concerns or even the slightest concern of anything going on with our children, and the earlier we can have intervention, the better, right?
Right.
The earlier the detection, the more success we can have with that regeneration or development. And we said it 100 times on this show, but it's that checkup for the neck up. You know, we go to the doctor once a year for our kids, or twice a year. They have their shots. They have to have it every so often. If you have any concerns whatsoever, you know, go get that assessment done. And whether you need a neurologist or a psychologist just doing a psychological assessment, whatever the case may be, based on what the referral reason is, you know, just go get it done. I mean,
if you see your grandfather having a hard time, you know, and then forgetting things and doing things that might get them in trouble, like burning food, don't ignore it, you know, like that is the right time to go see your and just go to your primary care doctor. Primary care doctors are equipped to do what we call a mini-mental exam, and so they just run a very quick test, and they can then refer to a neurologist if they need to. But yeah, it's very important that we don't ignore certain signs about that our brain is giving us, right? That there's something wrong.
Yeah, it makes me think of my mom, and you know, she tells us all the time she has CRS. You know what CRS is, Dr. B?
No.
Well, can't remember shit. And I'm just using her terms. I don't usually say those types of things, but we maybe need to refer her for a neuropsychologist.
It's my CRS acting up.
You know, so pretty funny. So the last thing that I have one more really quick question, because I think it's important for parents to understand this for their children, but also even for themselves. When you go see a neuropsychologist for that assessment, you know, are we getting hooked up to machines and all these things on our brains and our heads and hearts and everything else? I mean, are we getting plugged into different things and whatnot? I mean, what does the assessment look like?
I love when we do get that question a lot, and they really are expecting like a PET scan, or you know, that they're going to go into some
vibrations on my head or something, like some wires coming out of my head.
So what we're trying to create in the testing environment is real life situations, and so really it's just paper pencil test. We're going to give them tests that measure certain parts of their brain, but it really is that. I call them my toys, and I know I've said this a million times. It's just my toys, and it's actually just paper pencil test. Yeah,
that's awesome.
We just play with toys,
or we might place like some blocks in front of you.
That's right,
yeah. And ask you to.
I have some
arrange
right
them. Yeah. Get them. Let's show them real quick.
Yeah, so if really you know, whether you have concerns or not, if you get bored and you need a playmate, go see Dr. B, man. You guys can play some games and play with her toys.
She carries her toys in her purse, y'all.
That's awesome.
Amazing.
I hope that wasn't intended for me. It's like that.
You actually have block design in your bag?
I do.
That is awesome. That is so awesome. All right.
So how do we do this? See, it's just blocks, right? With different like patterns. One side will have nothing, or what's the instructions?
Yeah,
and one
it's all
side
white.
has one side's all white, and one side's all red, and one side is half red and half white, right?
One side's a square, one side shows two triangles.
And then you set them down on the table in front of the client, right? And you give them on a piece of paper,
So this is like some mind reading stuff?
I want you to look at this design and make it. And that's all you're doing, is you're just making what you see in front of you.
So is there like tarot cards and stuff too?
No tarot cards.
Okay.
But I might ask them to draw a tarot card so I can see how they are able to make drawings. But yeah, we look at basically some basic domains through our testing. That is attention, processing speed, executive function, visual spatial processing, and
Working memory, right?
right, and memory.
So if I want to know if my kid
are
is like excelling, like, because you talked about earlier the norm, these tests are based on, thousands of tests and you have like the norm, right?
Right.
And so can I like bring my kid in to see if he's like way above the norm and like accelerated?
Yeah, we can
And
see
I can go
this.
brag about him.
Yes, we can see how that brain is developing compared to other kids. Yeah, we can.
In both directions, average, above average, or below average. So
All right. And that's also why I guess they say, the kids can learn different languages. The younger you start them, the better it is, because their brain has all those extra neurons just waiting for something to use them for.
That's
Yeah,
exactly
that's
right.
That's right.
Very cool. Well, parents, start your kids out early, man. Spanish,
That's
Hindi,
the takeaway for today.
Dino language. We've been doing it with our kids because
Dino-lingo.
I'm sorry, Dinolingo. Yes, I'm gonna plug Dinolingo because we do it every morning at the breakfast table. It's awesome. It's good for us. I mean, I've learned all the different numbers and colors in Hindi, so it's pretty cool. But anyway, so we thank you, Dr. B, for being on the show today. Thanks for all the knowledge regarding neuropsychology and how that works. Our brain is so phenomenal.
It's incredible.
And we look forward to having you on our next episode as well, as we actually dive in deep to ADHD concerns that we have as parents, what it really looks like, what it means. So don't miss the next show as well, the Parent Survival Kit, from surviving to thriving in your household.